The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Randall Goodgame is a dear friend of mine and an outlandishly talented songwriter. For the last few years, he's been pouring his creative energies into the Slugs Bugs franchise, creating music, books, and television for children, inviting them into the freedom and joy of the gospel. His latest project is Make Ready for Christmas, a Slugs Bugs Christmas special. Randall Goodgame, thank you for being on the Habit Podcast today.
Thank you, Jonathan. It is always great to see you.
I am so excited about the new Slugs Bugs Christmas special, Make Ready for Christmas.
Woohoo! Yes.
Did I say that right?
Yeah, Make Ready for Christmas. That's right. Very nice.
Just released. Mm-hmm. I got to see it yesterday and was just enjoyed the heck out of it.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah.
So many fun friends coming in and out.
That's right.
Your wife doing an incredible job as about 4 or 5 different characters.
I know it. I know. It continues to be my favorite part of the whole Slugs Bugs show experience, is watching her put on wigs and outfits. And it's hilarious.
It really is. That's been one of my happiest surprises, is having seen Amy have this sort of stage on which to show some of her talents to the world. You know,
I know it. She does. She has a mean Kiwi accent. You know, we went to New Zealand for 5 weeks a couple of years ago, and she nailed it down. I think it's the animal control person that has the New Zealand accent.
Yeah, she comes in as some sort of Steve Irwin figure.
That's right.
So this is one thing I've been thinking about as I have watched the Slugs Bugs show is, Slugs Bugs has been collaborative from day one, right? You and Andrew Peterson made a record. How many years ago? 10 years ago?
It was 2006 when we made it.
Good grief. Yeah. Slugs Bugs and Lullabies.
Right.
And then somehow that became a whole universe of characters and books and TV show and all that. But it's always been collaborative. And I think, even more collaborative now than ever. I mean, not obviously more collaborative than ever now as a TV show, which is not something that one person can do under the best of circumstances. But one thing I love about it is that even so, with all that collaboration that's going on behind the camera, even what's going on in front of the camera, collaboration is always seems like it's always an important part of the story. Maybe not always, but no, I'm going to say always.
Oh man. Yeah. I mean, it's it's the whole process, of course. This is my first foray into any kind of TV, and there's, amazing writers and the producers and, the puppeteers. The whole thing is just this incredible collaboration of incredible gifts and people just kind of pouring themselves out. One of the things I love most about it, and like when the guests come on, for example, is because we're always, to one degree or another, talking about the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody that shows up, we're all kind of in it for the same reason. Everybody's here for the kids because we love Jesus and we want to reflect what loving him and walking through life looks like. And so everybody does that in their own little way, in their own little, community. And then we come in to the Slugs and Bugs show and all sort of pour our efforts into this, the each episode or each scene with that in mind.
Mm-hmm. One thing I've heard you say before is, I may be misquoting, so you can help me, but the gospel is a relentless invitation to freedom and joy.
Yeah.
Am I saying that?
Yeah.
Is that what I've heard you say it before?
Yes. And I feel like that's super important for me to remember the relentlessness. It's like, I love the juxtaposition of those words because it's a relentless invitation. It's you don't usually think of invitations as being that way.
Yeah.
But because Jesus is at the same time inviting us and pursuing us,
mm-hmm.
But never forcing our hand, that continues to be important for me personally, even just as we go through a pandemic, to be always remembering that what he's calling me to is joy,
mm-hmm.
In the relationship with him, inherent in our relationship with Jesus is joy and freedom. And so, yeah, you have heard me say that.
Can we talk about the ways in which that understanding, that reality, shapes the way you do your work? Obviously, this is a show. This is a podcast about writing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Conversations with writers about writing, and so how does that understanding of the gospel change the way you write, the way you write for children, the way you make? I say write, the way you make stuff.
Well, I think it's important because it's important to me because it always insists that I'm choosing a life of grace as opposed to a life of legalism. And so, because if I'm when you're writing, you always want to be honest, and sometimes it seems easier on the surface to have rules about. Rules isn't exactly right because rules are true, but if the only way that I can be honest with myself about who I am and what I need and what is true is if I'm able to see both the goal of the joy and freedom and life and creativity and truth and power of life with Jesus, at the same time as I see and I'm aware of all the ways that I fall short, and reveal my need for him, because it's if I'm aware of all of that, then I'm in a good place for creating, because I can be honest without shame, because I'm aware of the Lord's love for me unequivocally, having nothing to do with my own goodness, but having everything to do with his complete love and sufficiency, even in the face of my sin.
Yeah. And I think one thing about that invitation, how it plays itself out in the life of people who are making things is, you are it's so tempting to situate your identity in what you're making. And if I'm not producing, then there's something wrong with me. And if I'm producing something I'm not happy with, there's something wrong with me. And, it's so much to embrace the freedom of saying, I'm okay. Even if I don't write today, I'm going to be okay. And if I write something bad today, I'm going to be okay.
Oh man. Yeah. I guess, yeah, for sure. Like staying kind of plugged into the truth of Jesus and, is so important for when, like, not being a constant judge. Who is it? Mm-hmm. Who's the writer that we've talked about before that sort of talks about you got to like not like kick the judge out of the room?
Sounds like something Anne Lamott would say.
Yeah, it probably is Anne Lamott. But when you're writing, of course you're using you're using your discernment and your gifts, but never condemnation. Gosh. Yeah. Condemnation just destroys creativity for me.
Yeah.
I want to be, if I write something, I can chuckle at it. If I think, oh, that's cheesy, or that, I'm going to go ahead and erase that so nobody ever sees it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, writing out of the sort of the wellspring of freedom and the joy of getting to create without condemnation is that's a huge part of being productive, I think, because then you can just keep writing and not worrying about, trusting that you're going to find the good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Something I talk to my writing students about sometimes is confidence is not, you think everything you make is good. Confidence is being able to, being confident enough to say, oh, that's not as good as it could be. Right. Or this is, confidence says, this work isn't the best I've ever done, and that's okay because I'm okay. I think that's such an important idea.
Yeah,
having the confidence to be able to not be crushed when you fail.
Mm-hmm. One thing I remember telling my daughter from when she was really little was she always had a really strong opinion about music. Mm-hmm. There was some music that she hated, and there was certain music that she wanted to listen to over and over again. And I remember encouraging her with that it's good to be opinionated about music because you know what you like, and that gives you some sort of internal compass for when you create. Yeah. So yeah, it's confidence does not mean always being confident that you're, that you are making the very best thing, but just an internal awareness that you'll know it when you see it.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And, I know I've talked about this with probably more than one guest on this podcast, but, Ira Glass's thing that he says about, when you have taste, there's always a gap between it's the good taste that got you in the business in the first place. And right. You were talking about Livy having strong tastes, but as a child, or not just as a child, as any of us, our taste always outstrips our ability to deliver.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. And it's that taste that gets you in the business. It's also frustrating because you can't do yet what you want to do. Mm-hmm. And so you have to find a way to let that push you without crushing you.
Man, and you know what? Speaking of, I'm kind of circling back to what you talked about a minute ago with collaboration. Yeah. That's been a huge part for me, as with working in an arena that I'm not used to being in, with TV, is realizing the things that I'm not as good at, mm-hmm. or where I need help to get to that, to bridge the gap between the thing that I know that I'm looking for and the thing that I can do on my own. Our mutual friend Doug McKelvey is such a great writer, and I'll write a bit of the show. I'll write a scene of the show, knowing this didn't get as funny as I wanted to in this moment, but I also know it's going to go through Doug. So when he's the editor, the lead editor. And so I'll maybe make a note or call or text them or say something and say, hey, look in this scene. I need you to make it better. And he always can.
Yeah. Love it. That's so good. That's exactly where I was headed with the next question, but you've already hit it. I was going to ask you, how do you, going into TV where you have no experience,
right?
But you've answered that. I mean, you have put yourself in a situation to trust the people around you.
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult sometimes, you want to think you're good at everything. Mm-hmm. At least I do. But it's been so wonderful. And I mean, of course, I've had lots of experience with knowing that I can't play a trumpet, but for example, making records or play an electric guitar as well as Nathan Duggar. So it's like, call in the pros, get them to come in and do it. Or I may write a part for cello for a song, but when you get your cello player coming in, maybe they play the part that you've written, but then you say, hey, you know what, would you just play for a minute over this section and see what you come up with? And very often it's just better. Yeah. And you love that. You want that,
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Okay. So back to the idea of freedom and joy.
Mm-hmm.
It's relatively easy. It's comparatively easy to write moralistic stories for children rather than stories that invite children into freedom and joy. And it's hard in real life to invite children into freedom and joy because they might act like crazy people.
Right. There is a risk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Freedom and joy is always, we always want it for ourselves, but it's risky to offer it to people that we're supposed to be in charge of.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of the Garden of Eden, frankly. And God's choice to give us free will. It's not exactly the same, but our kids, we were talking last night around the dinner table. Our kids, my 13 and 17-year-old son were bemoaning the books that they have to read for school. They're all about racism or about the Holocaust or about, people escaping, murderous situations. Mm-hmm. And they were wondering out loud why they couldn't read Harry Potter or which, I mean, there's also some difficulty there, but my son Ben was like, hey, why can't we read Calvin and Hobbes? Calvin and Hobbes is awesome. And so Jonah, my 17-year-old, said, it might get, the teachers might not want to read Calvin and Hobbes because it might give some of the kids in the class ideas for ways they could misbehave. And I think that is the risk when I write songs for kids. Obviously, with scripture songs, the words are already written. But when I'm writing songs, silly songs for kids, I have to allow. I want to write songs that they will see themselves in.
Yeah.
And kids are mischievous, they're still trying to figure out how to be in the world. And so I try to reflect that. And sometimes by reflecting that, I'm reflecting the reality of it, which is, I'm working on, this weekend, I'm doing some Christmas shows. And there's one where there's a lyric that talks about that where this kid blows up a mailbox with a cherry bomb. And I definitely had a little bit of pushback from people about that when it first came out. But the other kids in the choir in the song boo him out when he sings that. They're like, "What? You blew up a mailbox with a cherry bomb? Boo!" So we have, it's acknowledged as not being the right thing, but it kind of gets back to what we were talking about earlier about being honest, with the human experience. We talk a lot. You'll hear people talk in church about how there's no sin that God isn't ready from you. He's seen it all. And so we come to him not trying to hide who we are, but just fully exposed. And that's the way we can get fully cleaned.
Yeah.
And so I think it's worth it to show the reality of human existence, to call it like we see it.
Yeah.
And with kids, sometimes that means bad behavior.
You're talking about this reminds me of something I heard some country songwriter talking about this, and I don't know if it originated with him. Now I can't remember who it was, but the idea that this person's goal was to put into words the things that their listeners were feeling, but the listeners didn't feel like they had the words for. This person's perspective was, the typical audience for a country song is a person who thinks to themselves it's not especially creative, which, by the way, I don't know that that's any truer than any other, audience. I'm not saying fans of country music are especially uncreative. I mean, what this person was saying is really true of any writer, is you are trying to give people words for things that they already know to be true, but it's never occurred to them to put it into words. And it seems to me that with kids, writing for kids, it's like you're doing that to an even greater extent, right? You're giving them the words for things that sometimes things they already know. Sometimes you're giving them, news they didn't already know.
Well, yeah, you're wanting to sort of engage, provide opportunities for them to engage, with the part of them that is already alive and kicking. It's kind of like what a roller coaster does. Like we're ready for, when you go to the fair, you're ready for a roller coaster, and so children are ready to dance, and they're ready to sing, and they're ready to laugh. And so that's what I'm trying to do with the music, the silly songs and such, is plug in or, provide an outlet or an inspiration to sort of awaken the things that are already there.
Yeah.
That the kids that they will recognize as, oh yeah, this is for me.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I love about the way you approach this is, one way to approach silliness is to say, this is just silliness. Hey, kids, blow off some steam. And one way to approach silliness, one way to approach silliness, and the way that I've often approached silliness with my kids is, could you stop being so silly? Let's just tone it down a little bit, or let's domesticate your silliness.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the way that you treat that silliness as maybe a clue to the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this joy that keeps being a little irrepressible, maybe there's a reason it's irrepressible.
Yeah.
Maybe it's pointing you toward an invitation to freedom and joy that is the gospel.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because it's way easier for me to create and to embrace the philosophy and what I'll call the reality of joy and the freedom that playfulness and silliness awakens. But it's more difficult to embrace that as a parent, because because I've got a kid, Benjamin. He wants to be silly and playful all the time. Even if he's just been in trouble, he'll try to turn it around. And I'll be like, you know what? I'm not ready for playfulness and silliness yet. I'm still a little bit, chafed at what just went down. And yet, it's just like we talked, you mentioned before, it's relentless. The invitation to freedom and joy, it reflects that, because when we're forgiven instantly, right away. And we get to drop all pretense and sort of shame and run and just leap back into the arms of our Father. And so, I think there is an element of playfulness, silliness, childlikeness, that reflects, that's inherent in the gospel. That's part of why, Jesus says you have to come to him like a child. We've talked about that before. but remembering our childhood in Christ and with God as our Father, and that we do get to receive His invitation to joy and relationship. That's a big part of walking in the faith every day.
Okay, I want to ask another aspect of the freedom and joy question with regard to creative work, because you've already mentioned the idea, and I completely agree with it, that when you are, creativity flows out of freedom, not out of fear, not out of rigor, and yet the creative life and productivity requires discipline.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a little bit about the difference between discipline and legalism. When you make rules for yourself that I'm going to sit down at a certain time of day, I've got rules that I'm going to hold myself accountable to.
Mm-hmm.
Is that legalism? Is that something? Are you comfortable with the language of, okay, there's a little bit of legalism that's helpful in the creative life, but then you also have to have freedom and joy.
Yeah, no.
You're not comfortable with that language.
Legalism, I think, is just always bad. And so I love what you called it. It's discipline is what we need.
Mm-hmm.
And the rules that, because with legalism, there is always an element of earning merit.
I'm going to be justified by following these rules.
Yeah. And discipline is, a series of rules that we put together outside that whole legalistic context. It's, for flourishing, and as we are being good stewards of our gifts, which we are lifting up for the Lord to bless, or to, as an offering to Him. So, and I've got lots of ways that, for me personally, I've always struggled with my voice. So I get up every morning and vocalize here in my office and have little tapes that I work with. And I call them tapes. They're digital on my, but isn't that a funny little slip that harkens back to growing up in the 80s?
Yeah.
But recordings that I sing along with. And if I don't do those things, then my performances and my practices suffer.
Mm-hmm.
And so same thing goes with, I don't write every day, but when I'm in a season of writing, it does help to be disciplined about being consistent, because it is hard to turn on and off the spigot, at least for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you've experienced that same thing.
Oh, sure. And, I guess I would say that it's not that legalism and fear doesn't work, because in some ways it does. It just doesn't work forever. Right? It's not sustainable. So I wrote several books out of, basically fear.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't write this book, I've got to give the advance back, or, there's been plenty of, fear and loathing, waking up and saying, what's wrong with you? Get up and write. Well, stop. I'd wake up at 4 a.m, beat myself up, and would get up and write a little bit till I felt better, and then I'd quit. And so this sort of self-medication, creative output is a kind of self-medication, which frankly worked for a while, and then reached a point where it just didn't work anymore, and I had to find another way to do the work. I had to find a way to do it out of joy rather than out of,
Yeah, that gives me something to think about. I wonder. I mean, I guess I think about maybe we might be using the word work differently. Like, I'm not sure. I still wouldn't think that. I don't think it like maybe it's kind of like you said, it works better with joy and freedom. But there's an element of, maybe when you're operating out of fear, maybe it's like you're operating with while also carrying around a 50-pound backpack or something.
Right. Yeah.
Where it's never going to work quite as well.
Yeah. No, I don't. And I'm not speaking up. I'm not pro legalism.
Yeah.
I'm just acknowledging that in terms of producing work that is, not bad work. I mean, pretty good work.
Sure.
At least in my life, a fear in legalism worked for a while.
Yeah.
And then I had to quit. Like I can't keep doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got to find another way. And part of that was sort of separating, doing some writing that I wasn't, like for years, I didn't do any writing I didn't get paid for.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to, except for the writing for the Rabbit Room. And that was like my one thing I did for free. And I was like, and that was my favorite thing to do. And I realized I've got to separate I've got to decouple the creativity from the providing for my family every day. And that's when I went back to teaching and I just had a saner life,
Yeah.
But
I know I relate to that I remember writing years ago, a little known fact. I don't even know if I've told you this, but years ago I wrote ad copy for a chemical company.
Mm-hmm.
And
I didn't know about that.
Yeah, there was nothing creatively inspiring about it. And I had to learn the terms, like what different chemicals did and what they meant. It wasn't out of fear, but it wasn't out of joy either. It was just out of the grind to pay the bills.
Mm-hmm. Someday I need to make a list of all the wacky things I wrote for. I've done some things very similar to writing for a chemical company, but I'm not ready to say it out loud. All the things, the funny things.
Oh, give me one. You got to give us one.
I helped with a memoir for kind of a C-list celebrity, and then I've written a lot of ad copy for a restaurant chain that I'm going to have to keep anonymous.
That shall remain nameless until later. You gather up some joy and freedom, and then get.
But
back
you know what? But even in that, I guess I reached a point where I found some ways to get some joy and freedom in some of that too, because I still write some of that stuff every now and then. If I've got to,
They've got budgets, man. They got budgets.
They do. It's well, you used a term that is exceedingly helpful, and that is flourishing, right? We set up parameters for ourselves that will lead to flourishing.
Mm-hmm.
And legalism, more or less by definition, is not leading to flourishing. Mm-hmm. And I guess maybe that's the difference between rules and what we think of as legalism. Is legalism can't lead to flourishing because it is it leads to a self, proving yourself or justifying yourself or whatever that can't possibly lead to flourishing. Yeah. Whereas discipline, if the goal of discipline is flourishing, not discipline, right? I think that's, there you go. The goal of discipline is not discipline. The goal of discipline is flourishing. And if your goal is discipline, you got something's off.
Yeah, that's true. It's like I remember this quote from a Billy Graham book years and years ago. He was quoting another preacher that I can't remember, but was a book on the Holy Spirit. It says, "When I gaze upon Jesus, the dove of peace flies into my heart. And when I gaze upon the dove of peace, it flies away."
Mm. Wow. Yeah.
So our goal is in the context of the discipline conversation. Our goal is glorifying the Lord and in our earthly lives flourishing so that we might glorify Him. And so, we apply these disciplines, but they can't be the end.
Yeah. It's great stuff. Well, thank you for everything you do to lead to flourishing of young people and families. It's good work.
Thanks, Judge.
Let me ask my last question, the one I always end with. Who are the writers who make you want to write and make stuff?
Well, I know I've told you before a couple of them. Right now, I'm going to say Dostoevsky, C.S. Lewis, and George MacDonald.
All right.
I'm reading Robert Falconer. I'm reading Mere Christianity again. Mm-hmm. And I've got the Brothers Karamazov on the second semester lists for my son Jonah's junior year lit class that I'm teaching.
Oh yeah.
So we brought our kids home from public school, or no, they were already home because of the pandemic. Right. They were doing Zoom classes and it was just destroying them. So I'm teaching lit this year.
Okay, I didn't know this.
For my junior high schooler. My junior in high school.
Uh-huh. Tell me about how does Dostoevsky? What about Dostoevsky makes you want to write?
So not going to have as good of an answer as if I would have read it recently, but the way he writes about people and how they, I just feel like when I'm reading Dostoevsky, I'm feeling the struggle, the reality of the struggle along with people. And I'm resonating and realizing and seeing myself in the conflicts and the decision-making that they've got to go through. I relate to his, to the way that he writes about humanity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, Randall, it's always a pleasure.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Talk again soon. Thanks for being on The Habit. And
I love it. You do. Hey, man, you do a great job here on The Habit. I love it.
Thanks. And I love Slugs and Bugs, so keep it up.
Will do. See you, brother.
Bye.
The Rabbit Room has partnered with Lipscomb University to make this podcast possible. Lipscomb has graciously given us access to their recording studio in the Center for Entertainment and Arts building. We're so grateful for their sponsorship, their encouragement, and the good work they do in Nashville. Special shout out as well to Jess Ray for letting us use her song Too Good as part of this podcast. Visit jessraymusic.com to hear more of her beautiful songs.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
This podcast was produced by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. All our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com, and to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.